My name is Michael Thompson, partner and senior wealth advisor here at Copperleaf Financial in Williston. And today our topic is trusts, all things trust. So thank you guys for joining us. I am thrilled to have my guest today, Rebecca Halvorson. Rebecca is the Senior Vice President and Marketing and Managing Director at Cumberland Trust. And we've been working together for a couple of years now on client cases and with trusts. Rebecca has been with the company since 2010. Has served at Ernst & Young before that, as well as FedEx. Rebecca holds a BA from Rhodes College and an MBA from Indiana University. She's very active in her community and also in the financial planning community as a member of the Financial Planning Association of Greater Memphis and also the Memphis Estate Planning Council, and is active in the Down Syndrome Association of Memphis. So Rebecca, thank you for joining us today. Like I said, we're thrilled to have you. And this is an important topic that we get lots of questions about. And many of our clients have trusts or are interested in how trusts operate. And so I think it's very timely. And I suspect this won't be the last session that we do on trust. I'm sure that we'll want to invite you back to take a deeper dive into trust. But I want to start with some basic questions for you around what is a trust and why would someone want to have a trust as part of their estate plan or part of their financial planning? So fill us in a little bit about kind of the basics of what a trust is and why someone might want to have one.
Okay. Thank you so much, Michael. It's my pleasure to be here, and I have enjoyed working with you and getting to know a little bit more about your firm. And basically, a trust is a fiduciary relationship. You think of it as having three parties. You're going to have a grantor, a trustee, and a beneficiary. So the grantor is the one who places the assets in the trust, and there has to be someone or an entity to administer the trust according to its provisions. So you have the trustee, and then the beneficiary is who benefits from the assets placed in trust. So they are the ones who receive distributions from the trust and so forth. So I like to always just kind of remind people it's those three key parties once the trust is established. And, there are a variety of reasons that people choose to create trusts. Yeah. Some estate plans don't have trusts in them, but often folks want to have a trust for privacy issues. When they pass away, they can avoid probate, which is a public process. Sometimes people create trusts for asset protection.
Yes.
During their lifetime, or once they've passed away, and they want their children to have the benefit of asset protection and have trust for their children, perhaps. There can be tax planning reasons that an estate planning attorney would recommend a trust in the estate plan. And sometimes, it's, Michael, as simple as maybe family dynamics or just the personality of beneficiaries.
Yes.
So a variety of reasons, but when someone goes and meets with their estate planning attorney, and we always work in collaboration with that drafting attorney, that's where the idea usually comes to the forefront, that a trust would be beneficial or not.
Yep. So I like what you said. You said a couple of things around privacy. So privacy, is a big deal. Some probate, as we know, is a public process. So when we die and our estate is probated, it's open to public scrutiny. It really is a public process. And if we have a trust, that's completely private, and it really takes care of those arrangements ahead of time.
Right.
So I think that's an important thing to consider. And you also talked about taxes and avoiding estate taxes. Right now, the threshold is very, very high, but it's also set to sunset in a few years. And who knows what Congress might do with the estate tax level or the the unified credit. And so having a trust can be a good way to avoid estate taxes on the estate too, right?
Right. And, Michael, one point too, if someone establishes what, is called a revocable living trust during their lifetime,
Mhm.
and they place most of their assets or all of their assets in that revocable living trust, it doesn't have the same asset protection because the grantor has the ability to move assets in and out and whatnot. But
Mhm.
one thing that often when we talk to people, they want to know what happens when I die. So they are thinking about, when they're gone. But with a revocable living trust, they serve as their own trustee while they're able to do that.
Mhm.
But as we all know, life can sometimes, send us unexpected events. And we have clients who sometimes grow tired of managing their own affairs,
Mhm.
or they might have a health event that prevents them from being able to do that. And so a successor trustee or another trustee can step in during someone's lifetime to help, manage those assets that are within the trust. So sometimes that's a benefit as well.
Yeah, I think that's important also. And the way I think about that is either on the older end of the spectrum or the younger end of the spectrum, sometimes a trust can be an effective tool to manage those funds where or administer the management of those funds, distributions, disbursements, payments out of the trust to either a younger individual who isn't competent or for whatever reason doesn't have the maturity or the expertise to manage a large amount of money or manage distributions out, or maybe someone is a little older and doesn't have either the capacity or the desire to take care of the administrative issues around managing a trust or managing really the administration of the trust, right?
Right.
And I know you guys do actually a lot of work with trusts for particular cases where people may be a little older or may need an extra level of care. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's an important role too.
Absolutely. And one thing I also just want to make clear and be sure that people understand is Cumberland Trust is strictly a directed trustee,
Yes.
which means that folks like Michael, who already have the trusted relationship of managing the assets, stay in the relationship.
Yep.
So most definitely, we handle the administrative function. So when you do have a situation, and I've had lots of these, we work with older clients who may have children who care very much about them and would like to help, but they are now, busy raising their own families. They may not live near mom and dad.
Mhm.
So sometimes these situations where we're brought in, a couple maybe older, I've seen where, one spouse has a health issue, has dementia, for example.
Mhm.
The other spouse who was accustomed to kind of having everything in order and under control finds themselves, tired, weary, their judgment starts to, kind of be a little bit shaky, and they need some assistance. So often, definitely, we can come in as co-trustee to work with that spouse who has this heavy burden at the time. And we can do things like pay household expenses out of the trust. And, if their home is in the trust, we can make sure that it's maintained with trust funds. We don't have on staff caregivers, but we have relationships with caregiving companies.
Mhm.
So we can coordinate to have caregivers come into the home and do those types of things so that that spouse who might be tired and carrying, some of this burden can focus more on being with, enjoying the company of their spouse rather than some of that day-to-day administrative work that can just make you a little more weary.
Yes, that's so important. And I want to take a step back actually and talk about those different roles within the trust and operating a trust. We've talked a little bit about the reasons for having a trust, and I think we'll continue to explore that, but I want to talk about those roles. But before we do that, even I want to remind our guests, thanks everybody for joining us, that we're open for questions. So if you have a question, please enter it in the chat box. We will remain or allow time at the end for questions. So there will be some time at the end, but if you have a burning question that you want to get out there, go ahead and enter it in the chat box. Let's talk about some of the roles within a trust. So we know there's the beneficiary, the people that are assigned to receive the benefit of the trust over time. And there's the grantor, the folks that put money in the trust or assets in the trust itself. And a trust is really I think of it like a box, right? Some people put a legal box. So the grantor puts money in. And then there's a trustee, and trustees can kind of fall into a couple of different roles too. And the trustee is, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is responsible for sort of managing or overseeing the trust while it's in existence. One of the questions that I hear clients ask about is who should be the trustee. It's kind of clear who's going to put the assets in the trust, and it's usually pretty clear who the beneficiaries are going to be. But it's that trustee role that can be, there can be some questions about it. And I know that a lot of times the grantor, the person or the people that put the assets in that box, in the trust, can choose to be trustee or may choose to be trustees for a certain period of time. But sometimes there are pitfalls to having that be an individual. Sometimes I see clients who ask a family member, a brother, a sister, or a child to become trustee of a trust at a certain point. But that can be problematic and burdensome in a way because, and how does Cumberland work as either a co-trustee or in that trustee role, and talk a little bit about that role of trustee and maybe what are some of the things that people should be aware of when they think about whether to use a co-trustee or a corporate trustee. Sometimes that word corporate trustee kind of bothers me a little bit, but so I think we need to clarify that. But talk a little bit about that trustee role and how you think about that.
Sure. So basically, the trustee is tasked with carrying out whatever is in that governing document. Mm-hmm. So as someone thinks about naming their trustee, they need to be familiar with what their provisions are and what they're really asking someone to do. And, I often tell people, you think it's an honor to name a family member as executor or trustee or whatnot. But often when I meet with people, they'll say, I was named in my Aunt Sue's document, and wow, was it a lot of work. So while it can be an honor, it is work. And definitely there are situations where individuals can serve and it makes sense for them to serve and they do a fine job. I think most individual trustees certainly try to do the right thing. But the fact of the matter is that most individuals don't do this on a day in and day out basis. Mm-hmm. So you can be setting someone up for kind of, some angst as they try to figure out the pathway and as they have to make decisions. And you have to think about the beneficiaries and the questions they're going to have, and the remainder beneficiaries and what their rights are and the questions they're going to have, and who's receiving statements and who's in the position to question the trustees' distributions and so forth. So definitely, I think there are times where an individual makes sense and things go along just fine. But I think the reality is, most trust litigation arises when an individual has been serving, not because they've necessarily done anything intentionally wrong. But as I referenced, people, when money's involved, they start to ask questions and people can get frustrated and, unfortunately, sometimes turn to litigation. A corporate trustee, you're right, Michael, it sounds a little bit, corporate, cold, whatever you want to say. The folks who started Cumberland started the firm really with the intent that we would solely handle administration of trust and that we would be there for the families. We understand, these are not our assets. These assets belong to the beneficiaries. We are happy to serve in a co-trustee role. We're often asked to serve as sole trustee, of course, but we're also often asked to serve as co-trustee. And usually in a co-trustee role, most of the time we're serving with a family member. That family member, we need to know our beneficiaries, but it's difficult to know them as well as sometimes family members would know them. So when we're working with a co-trustee, they are involved in the decisions. We consult, we come to agreement, but Cumberland is responsible for basically the record keeping. The distributions all have to flow through us. So there are definitely situations where a co-trustee arrangement is kind of the best of both worlds. I was talking to somebody yesterday who had gone to see their estate planning attorney, and she said, I don't know if we really have enough to justify a corporate trustee or whatnot, but this is a blended family situation. And she said, the one thing the attorney said is whatever you do, just don't name one of the children to be trustee for all of the children. Just get that out of your head.
Yep.
Because the one spouse said, well, I just thought we would name the oldest son. And the attorney is wise. He's an older attorney. He's seen a lot. And he said, just get that out of your head right now. You've got, blended family dynamics. And when you're gone and you're not there as kind of that equalizer, you don't want one child overseeing the other child's distributions.
It's so challenging and problematic. And, I was asked to be and served as an expert witness in a lawsuit a couple of years ago between a couple of siblings, family members who were involved with a trust and had an enormous dispute that nobody anticipated. And, it's a lawsuit that went on for a couple of years and was expensive and painful. Right. And those are the kinds of things that I think people want to avoid when thinking about those roles and who should serve as trustee. Right. Let's talk a little bit about Cumberland Trust and how you guys operate as an independent trust company, because I think that's important for people to know. Not that, I want people to know about Cumberland and about the options that they have with using different trust companies and different kinds of trusts. And so I want people to hear a little bit about how you guys operate and how that might be different from what people might experience or see from a traditional bank trust company or a standalone trust company. And the way I think about it, just by way of background, is traditional trust companies and banks really exist to manage money more than anything else. They serve a function as an administrative function, but that's really their role. But you guys have taken kind of a different approach, as have a number of other independent trust companies. So talk about that structure and how that might be different, and how I think you guys kind of see the trust as having some key roles and kind of some key advisors involved with the trust. So talk about that a little bit.
Okay. So Cumberland Trust just celebrated its 20th anniversary. So
congratulations.
Thank you. And we were founded by some individuals who actually had been in a traditional bank trust department. And they had experienced situations where the bank would become trustee, and the family's financial advisor, trusted financial advisor of many years, would basically have to fade into the background and out of the picture, because when the bank was named, they would gather all of the assets, because just as you said, they want to manage those assets. And then they also served as trustee and administered the trust. So the idea behind Cumberland Trust was that we would have a different model. And at the time it was very unique and you didn't come across it very often. And that model really was to solely concentrate on trust administration and estate administration.
Mhm.
So we partner with financial advisors like yourself. Most of our clients come to us from their financial advisor where they're doing their estate planning and the conversation starts to happen. Who's the trustee? Who do you want to manage your money? That's usually where current relationships come to us. Also from the estate planning community, from attorneys who work with their clients and ask the question, do you have a financial advisor already in place? And would you want that to continue? And so they know that it's important to use what's, we're called a directed trustee.
Mm-hmm.
So because we're not trying to do what you do, we're able to offer a really wide breadth of services. So a little bit about how we're structured. We are actually a privately owned Tennessee trust company with headquarters in Nashville, Tennessee. But we have 9 regional offices that are basically the Southeast, Atlanta, Texas, Tampa, St. Pete, but we're also going up into the Midwest. We have an office in St. Louis and in Philadelphia. And we're growing kind of where we get pulled and where we're needed. Mm-hmm. But the heart and soul of the company and all of the action once a trust comes in and we're serving as trustee does occur out of our headquarters. Mm-hmm. And the offices similar to the one I staff, we are more out trying to make sure people are aware of our services, developing business, that type of thing. But there in Nashville, we have over 100 employees. Mm-hmm. And that's where our executive management is, senior management. We have a tax team that can coordinate with the family's CPA. We have a special assets team that works on, when we have relationships that have assets that are not cash and marketable securities, so vacation homes, farms, that type of thing. We have a special assets team that reviews those assets and works with families on those. And then we have a legal compliance team, of course, marketing, all those types of things. But the heart and soul of the organization and working with beneficiaries occurs with our administration team, so our trust administration team.
So you really, let me just jump in a little bit. So you really, you guys function as the administrative arm of the trust, really providing those day-to-day services, the disbursement of money, and the other things that are involved in administering the trust, while the CPA, the estate planning attorney, and the financial advisor or the wealth management team do their jobs and you do your job. And it sounds like a pretty good team working on behalf of the client and the beneficiaries. I've always thought that a trust company that manages the money has a little bit of a conflict of interest, or actually a huge conflict of interest, because it's in their interest to hold on to the money. And a lot of times when I hear about conflicts with corporate trustees, it's because, they never want to give up the money. They never want to have any influence or let us tell them how we want the money managed and things like that. So you've completely avoided that challenge or that conflict by establishing the structure that you guys have established. I think that's great.
That's right. You're exactly right. We sometimes say, if you're doing it all, how likely are you to fire yourself? If the group down the hall is managing the money. So it is that bifurcated platform. And you're exactly right. When we're brought into a relationship, we don't come in to replace someone else on the team. Mm-hmm. We come in as an addition to that team. Mm-hmm. To work with the folks the family has already chosen.
Yeah. Talk a little bit more about the kind of the role as trust administrator. We've talked about how challenging it might be for a family member and how that can create some conflicts within the family. So what does trust administration involve? What all is your team doing with clients and beneficiaries on a day-to-day basis? What's going on there?
So basically, if we kind of just think about how a relationship comes to us, I'll kind of walk through that and try to give an example. So it usually starts with a conversation like you and I might have, and you might say, I've got this situation. We need a corporate trustee. I would gather the document, the asset information. We would have our legal team review everything and then come back to you with, okay, here are the steps of how we might be able to serve. So while all that is happening, Michael, I am trying to glean more details about what the particular situation needs. What does the family need? What type of administration is going to be required? How complex are the assets? What is the beneficiary situation? Is it a recently widowed spouse? Is it a young person with substance abuse issues? You know, my role is to really try to dig in and understand what are we going to be asking our administration team to do. So as we gather that information, then I would be in consultation with our administration team. And when we're ready, I would say, you know, I now need to know the trust officer name. And as part of my role, I would make the introduction at the appropriate time of that trust officer. Now, the trust officer is going to be tasked with having an understanding of the relationship. They're going to, you know, have all the information that I've gathered, and they're going to be familiar with the document, with the assets and so forth. And then their role is going to be working with the beneficiaries to establish the distributions. And every situation is different. But for example, often they'll sit with the beneficiary initially and talk through a budget along with the financial advisor. They'll understand, you know, what does the document allow? What types of distributions will we be allowed to make? Do they want to receive those directly into a checking account every month? Are there quarterly distributions? You know, what are those distributions? And then the trust officer, you know, they really become that day-to-day point of contact. So they are there for the beneficiary. We always give a specific trust officer with all of their direct contact information. It's never a 1-800 number. That trust officer sits on a team, so they have other folks to mentor them, to ask questions of, to have backup if they happen to be out. But basically, they start that relationship and establish, you know, the needs of the beneficiary and how we're going to meet those needs. And then over time, as the beneficiary might have, you know, an unusual request or whatever the situation is, it's up to the trust officer to know about that and then advocate for that, or sometimes deny that request. So they're really in there doing the day-to-day. Every relationship is different. So sometimes the beneficiary already has a very close relationship with the financial advisor and they want to speak primarily through the financial advisor. We just have to kind of figure out a rhythm and understand what their expectations are from the front end. And our administration team is structured so that we have what we call personal trust. And those relationships would be things that might not have anything that's particularly unusual or particularly challenging. And by that, I mean, or I'll contrast that with, we have a team that strictly administers special needs trusts. Michael, you know, some corporate trustees won't administer a special needs trust.
Right.
Cumberland happens to feel like those families are often the ones who need us the most.
Yes.
And the trusts have to be administered in a very specific way so that you don't somehow disqualify the beneficiary from benefits they may be receiving.
Right.
Sometimes there are just, you know, additional levels of support that are needed. And so by having a team that all day, every day administers special needs trust, you know, that's just an added benefit we can offer because we're not trying to do other things. And then we also have a group that we refer to as distinctive care. So that's where a situation like I mentioned earlier, where you might have, you know, aging grantors who just need assistance with paying bills, arranging for caregivers, that type of thing, where they can come in and provide that kind of extra level of service.
I really appreciate the distinctive care role, because we see so many times with aging parents and families, and the the next generation, the kids may be, in their 50s or 60s and very busy and having the burden of taking care of a lot of those day-to-day activities around managing the payments and the distributions when, mom and dad may be dad may be in a memory center and mom may be in assisted living.
Right.
That's a tremendous service and a tremendous benefit. So I think
And
that's really important.
one thing I would mention along those lines too is, Cumberland can never serve as like power of attorney for healthcare. So we're always coordinating with whoever's in that role. So in the example you just gave, the adult child might be, healthcare power of attorney. So they're going to make those decisions if mom isn't able to, of where she's going to live or, what medical procedures she's going to have. And then we would interface with that power of attorney to be sure that those things were paid for. But we can't ever be the ones to make healthcare decisions or anything like that. And similarly, when we're working with our special needs team, sometimes those beneficiaries are not in a position to be able to advocate for themselves. So they would have possibly a guardian or, power of attorney, conservator, someone who would direct Cumberland. And so they would be making kind of the person decisions, and we would be making sure that things were paid for.
Yep. And then doing the reporting, there's reporting that's required as fiduciary to certain parties at the end of the year or periodically, and you guys take care of that also. And I think that's an important role too. I want to talk about one of the things that I think people don't think about enough or aren't aware of enough, maybe because they haven't experienced it, is at the time of death, sort of post-mortem and that transition period. And talk a little bit about how Cumberland or how a corporate trustee can really facilitate that difficult period right after a death, when there are things that have to happen, and that can be very challenging for a family member acting as a trustee or acting alone as a trustee. How does Cumberland act? What do you do in those situations at the time of death?
That's a great question, Michael, and really good point. So we have a team that we refer to as our estates team, and their sole role is to handle the work that's created when someone passes away. So a couple of points. Cumberland can serve as executor in some states, not all states. But when someone does have a revocable living trust set up, if we're named as successor trustee, we can handle that post-death work as successor trustee. So, I'm going to give you an example of just kind of a scenario we've had recently where we were working with a couple. They were older, came in while they had capacity just to kind of help. One spouse passed away. We basically handled that work that was created at her death alongside the attorney. And, they're just, I always say it doesn't seem quite fair when someone dies that work is created. So we like to tell the family, your work should be grieving and healing. Let us do the work of tax returns, specific bequests being passed out, setting up resulting trust, whatever that might be.
Right.
But in this situation, we were able to handle that first spouse, the postmortem work related to that. When the second spouse passes away, we're named to deal with that. And then there are resulting trusts. So we will be setting those up for the benefit of their adult children. And, I think one thing that's helpful to think about is just the continuity that brings. The adult children have already become familiar with the trustee. They know the financial advisor. they're not going to be faced with something at the time of their loss of their parents that here comes a stranger in as a corporate trustee. They already know who we are. They see the benefit. In this situation, they know that we'll continue to be there even after their parents are gone. But most definitely, there's so much work that has to happen when someone does pass away. And sometimes, geography can be an issue. When the second spouse goes and there's a house to be sold and whatnot, and the children, live 10 states over, it's just helpful to have a team that's available that has seen that before, and they can come in and they have their checklist and they work collaboratively with the attorney and they get things done and then move on to the next phase.
I think that's so important. And I've seen it so many times in, my 25-year career working with hundreds of families, how challenging that period can be, that grieving period after a death, and how much work actually is involved in settling the estate, depending on how organized things are. But
right,
to relieve people of a certain amount of that burden, I think is a tremendous gift. There's a lot to unpack here, and we haven't even talked about the different types of trusts and lots of other things. I'm trying to go down kind of a path with you around questions that I hear from clients and things that we see on a day-to-day basis. But I want to remind people that if you have questions, go ahead and enter them in the chat box, and we'll be able to address those and kind of as we go. And we've still got a little bit of time left, so we'll allow some time at the end also in case you have questions there. We've talked about trust administration. We've talked about the roles of different professionals in the work of helping clients managing a trust. And there's the asset management part, there's the administrative part, there's the tax and accounting part, and the legal part, and all those roles kind of fit together, and the role of an independent trust company such as yourself. But I guess I want to step back and ask about kind of the different types of trusts that Cumberland works with. We talked about asset protection. We talked about revocable living trusts. We talk about irrevocable trusts. But there are also things like charitable trusts. We often work with clients around charitable trusts and life insurance trusts. Does Cumberland sort of see all those different kinds of trusts, and do you help clients with the administration of each of those different types of trusts, or are you only limited to sort of revocable or irrevocable, or kind of talk about that a little bit?
And we pretty much can administer any type of trust. So, and there are so many, as you mentioned, different types of trust and different acronyms for trusts and whatnot. And I always tell people, if there's any question, all we need to do is have a conversation. We can have someone on our legal team, take a quick look at it and let you know if it's something we can do or not. I would say my most challenging question in my recent memory is a pet trust. And we typically shy away from pet trusts, but sometimes there are creative ways that you can, handle those. But we do pretty much any type of trust that someone's going to come from their estate planning attorney with, where they need us to serve. I will say, you mentioned insurance trust. We try on irrevocable life insurance trust. We don't typically serve on those unless it is a relationship that has additional parts to it, at least in the, as you know, in the beginning part, when you're responsible for paying premiums on the insurance policy and so forth. It's a straightforward process, but there is some liability as trustee. So often when someone comes and says, can you administer this ILET? My first question is there someone who can do that until the proceeds are paid out and there's actually something to do in the more the administrative realm?
Yeah, right. It's a good point, because Cumberland can, as an independent trustee, as an independent trust company, can play an active role, but you can be named as successor trustee, or you can be named in the trust and actually never kind of step into action until called for. There's a point at which you'd be called in to serve. And we've gotten a couple of questions, and it leads to one of those questions, which is, how much does it cost to work with an independent trust company such as Cumberland? And at what point would there be an expense for Cumberland to serve in that role?
So,
talk about that.
sure, there are no fees until, like you said, we're actually serving, actually in and doing something. So I spend a lot of my time talking to people who have questions, talking about, their plans, understanding that we are named, and if we're named in a future capacity. And the honest truth is, sometimes we're named in a document and we may never be needed. We might be named behind several individuals. So there's no fee to naming us in a document. And we really don't have any comprehensive way of knowing when we're named in every document. So sometimes I get that phone call of, oh, you're named and this has happened, and we have to get to work and figure out if it makes sense for us to serve or not. So that's exactly right. No fees until we're serving. And then basically our fee structure, there are two fee structures. So one is more of a defined fee if we're handling that post-mortem estate administration work, if you will. So in that instance, we try to glean a clear understanding of what is involved. As with people, every estate is different, and some are more complicated than others. And we would try to understand that and quote a fee for that work. And that's a defined period of time. We do have a standard estate fee schedule, but I will tell you, we look at everyone individually. Just to give you a ballpark though, that fee schedule starts at 3% on the first million. So if an estate was basically, roughly $1 million, it would be in that 30,000 range to handle the administration. But there are a lot of factors that we take into consideration. And then that percentage drops down as the assets go up. And then the other type of fee schedule that we have is for ongoing trust administration. So that's what we're typically doing. And those fees are basically based upon the value of the assets that are in the trust. So our personal trust fee schedule is 60 basis points, or 0.6% of the assets under administration. And there's a $100 per month administrative fee. So I always tell people, if you're looking at, $1 million trust, you're basically going to be in that, $7,200 range. There is also a tax coordination fee of $500 annually. That's for us to prepare a tax packet. We coordinate with the CPA. We review, sign, and file the trust tax return as trustee. So the 60 basis points is kind of one, milestone marker to kind of put in your head. If we are doing the special needs administration or distinctive care administration, the basis point fee is a little higher. It's 1%. And sometimes we get the question, do you have a minimum trust size?
Yes.
We don't have a minimum trust size. We do have minimum account fees. So those can come into play. So basically, if a trust, I always tell people, really, for it to be economically feasible, we need to be in that $1 million range. We definitely have trusts that are smaller, but that's where you do have to kind of start looking at the economics of it a little bit more closely.
And that's exactly how we think about it too, because we act as fiduciaries for clients as well. So part of our role is helping people assess, does it make sense economically for this level of service? And we certainly have found that the role that you guys play makes good sense for most people, but if the assets are really significantly below that $1 million level, then we have to start questioning it.
Right.
Yep. But then the question is, who's going to serve in that role, and how much is that going to cost ultimately?
Right.
Too. There's a question that came in, and I'll read it. It says, it sounds like real estate would fall under special assets. That may or may not be true, right? Can you say more about the value of considering a trust for raw land that may or may not be able to be developed in the future, and any general considerations? So really talking about raw land within a trust. I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but
So let me take a stab at it. We'll see.
Yeah.
So it sounds like I had mentioned that we have a special assets team, and that's right. When we bring in a trust that does have property in it, so whether that's raw land, farmland, whatever it is, commercial real estate, we would want to have an understanding of what that property is, how is it being used, what's occurring on it, if it's vacant, what the intent is for the future.
Yep.
And that would be something that, yes, our special assets team would review that as it came in. There is a consideration of, typically a trust needs to have some liquidity as well. So if it was a trust that only had raw land in it, we would have to have, conversations about, where is the liquidity coming from to pay insurance taxes and so forth. We would want to know how it's structured. So for example, when we are dealing with farmland, we always ask the question of, is it held within an LLC? We like to see some sort of wrapper around that to provide protection if there is an accident, on that property, and to protect the other assets that are held in trust.
Yep.
There are, as a directed trustee, anytime we have property, we do want to name a property manager. So just as we have a financial advisor named to handle the cash and marketable securities, we would want the property manager named so that they could direct us regarding things like selling the property. Now, and there is, kind of going back to the fee point as well, there is a special asset fee schedule that is separate and applies depending upon the type of asset and so forth. So often we have trusts where beneficiaries have their homes in the trust. So the beneficiary is often named as property manager, and that house is put on our master insurance policy. We pay the taxes and insurance on it and so forth. But definitely we do have trusts with raw land, and it would just be kind of understanding the overall picture.
So for the person that asked that question, that might be worth a further conversation to explore that a little bit more deeply and kind of dig into the questions around that and kind of what the intent is and what's being considered there. I want to go back to geography a little bit, because I know here in Vermont, and probably in every state, but in my experience, living here for 30 years or something, people like to work with local companies. And the fact that you guys are based in Nashville and in Tennessee might be a little off-putting to people. I'll just put it out there. Sure. But you guys have clients all over the country, right? And you do your work with people everywhere, wherever they are. Do you find that there are any limitations to kind of being located in Nashville and Tennessee? And I guess I'll just stop with that.
Sure. Well, definitely we have beneficiaries in 47 states. So we definitely work with folks all over the country. We have some beneficiaries out of the country as well. And I understand that question and appreciate it. I will say, I think if the last, 24 months or so have taught us anything, it is that we can be in touch no matter where we are. But seriously, our trust officers do travel. I can't say that they're going to travel on every single account, depending kind of on the complexity of it and the value of it and whatnot. I mean, we do try to travel in a smart way, but we can do so much over the phone or over email. And definitely we're always available for these types of video meetings and whatnot. So I think once someone understands that and kind of realizes that if I need them, they would be here. Sometimes people kind of turn that and say they actually like it, because sometimes people appreciate the privacy that some distance can bring. So there's not someone down, just down the street that knows, quite honestly, there are a lot of sensitive issues that we deal with as trustee.
Sure.
So I find that it's more of a positive. And what it really does too, is it allows us to have, a really deep bench and a lot of knowledge right there together and access to decision makers. So you don't have a trust officer trying to call, home office to get an answer. They can walk down the hall or, whatnot and get to the general counsel if they need to.
Yeah, I think there can be a tremendous benefit in knowing that somebody downtown, doesn't know all your business, and
Right.
and you can feel maybe a little bit more comfortable in the community.
Exactly.
We've got a question about the tax filings, and because you guys are, serve as directed trustee in your model overall, working with other professionals, it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that that you can file the tax return, or the client CPA can file the tax return, that you don't have a, kind of only one way of approaching the tax filing of the trust. Is that correct?
So as trustee, we would file a return, but the family CPA can definitely prepare the return. So we do have families who come to us with relationships with CPAs, and they want to keep those intact, and we're fine with that, as long as it's a CPA who's accustomed to preparing trust tax returns and whatnot. Then, but sometimes we have families who say, I don't really have a CPA relationship. And in that situation, we would either prepare it at Cumberland, or we have relationships. More likely, we would outsource it to a CPA firm that we work with that's accustomed to our process and whatnot.
So in our case, where we have our sister accounting firm, working very closely with them and have them do the tax preparation, would just be a seamless process.
Right.
Yeah.
Our tax group would coordinate with them as the CPA, right?
Okay, great. Well, I'm looking for more questions. I really appreciate the fact that people are sending in questions. I want to ask you, before we've got a few more minutes, Becky, is there anything that we haven't covered yet that you feel like is important for people to know, either if they're considering a trust, or maybe they have a trust and they're uncomfortable with it, and something about how it's being administered now they have some questions about, or is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think people should know about?
Well, one thing I think, and just thinking about Cumberland Trust, I mentioned that we're 20 years old and we've crossed over the 5 billion in assets under administration mark. And that has really been from word of mouth and from clients telling other clients, and financial advisors and attorneys having a good experience with us. I mean, we work with over 800 advisors. We try to keep our account load really reasonable for our trust officers. What we have to offer families is customer service and expertise. So we have to really be sure that we are staffed appropriately and that trust officers can handle what's on their plate. Because if that begins to slip, then that reflects on us. So we really spend a lot of time trying to hire well. I always get the question from administration when they tell me the trust officer they'd like to place with a relationship. They'll always say, is that okay with you? And my answer is always the same. It's like, I love all of our trust officers. I think that, certainly you might end up with a situation where there wasn't that personality match or whatever, but I think that we hire really well. We have people who are doing this because they want to help families. They're very well educated. A lot of our trust officers are attorneys, or they have their MBA, they have, trust officer certifications. So our CEO often says he hires people with compassion and with business acumen, and he can teach them how to handle trust. So I would just say, if there is a situation where someone is curious about us, reach out to Michael. We can hop on the phone. I'm always happy to be available. And if we're not the right match, we'll say that. We're not, we're not looking to get into relationships that aren't good for the families and good for Cumberland. We want to work with families who need us and that we can help.
Yeah. And I can certainly speak to that and say everybody that I've met at Cumberland has kind of met that criteria of being, compassionate and smart folks, and someone that I would be very comfortable working with and be very comfortable having one of my family members or certainly one of my clients or clients' family members working with. I think you guys exhibit a lot of trust, and I think that's great. We got another question here which says, can you, as the advisor of the trust, advise the beneficiaries on how to handle income or property given? I'll throw that to you, but I'll answer it first for myself, which is we certainly work with, in our role as the wealth advisor and the planners on the team, we certainly work with beneficiaries to help them understand anything that they need to understand, how this income and these assets can fit into their overall plan and vision for their lives, help them with the planning and the management of their future and their current financial situation. But what's your answer there, Becky? How do you read that question?
Most definitely, our trust officer, that's part of what they would try to understand as they get to know the beneficiary. What are their needs, and help them understand the intent of the trust. And if the intent is to have funds there for their lifetime, whether it be for education, for starting a business, whatever, definitely the trust officer would have those conversations with, how is this money going to be used and that type of thing.
And I would say we work together on that because we serve in a multi-generational role with our clients. We work with, like I said, kind of through generations and help with education, help the next generation understand the responsibility of handling their wealth and the assets as they kind of move through the generation. So I think that's important. Well, we're getting to the end of our time. Let's see, I've got another question. Just a thank you. We've had some nice thank yous for spending our time today talking about trusts. Becky, I think we may want to continue this at some point next year and pick up the conversation. It's been incredibly valuable having you. As I said, we have really enjoyed working with Cumberland. I think the benefit of an independent trustee in working with folks' trusts and serving in that fiduciary role is incredibly valuable and really goes well beyond the traditional trust company or the traditional bank relationship. And I certainly encourage people to look into it if they have any questions or want to explore existing trusts or future trusts. So I guess we'll wrap up now. Thanks everybody for joining us today. We will post this session. It's being recorded. We're going to post it on our website. So within the next week or so, you can look for it on our website. And thank you, Becky. If we have questions that come in afterwards, we certainly will be able to handle them and forward them your way. And I thank everybody for joining us today. Next month, December, my guest will be Larry Swedrow. We're going to talk about this past year, what 2021 has been like in the markets, and Larry's predictions for 2022. And that should be very interesting. So I'm sure we'll be talking about inflation and all kinds of things. So look for the schedule for our December session, and look forward to seeing everybody then. So thank you, Becky, and thank you everybody for joining us.